While everyone's waiting, Colin, what was that place where you look for LiDAR maps that are high quality?
Oh, the national map.
The national map. Thank you.
Yeah, it's one of the layers. Or they've got a whole bunch of like LiDAR based layers, but yeah. I think it's something you missed away.
Jessica, if you want to get started, I think we're good to go, and we'll just hope that Sue's able to connect.
Okay, well, let's get started. Thanks for carrying on without me last time, and Duncan for stepping in when I wasn't feeling good. So it was great. I don't like the last minute changes, so it's okay. Okay, so I guess so the emergency exits are at the back of the room on both sides, and you could go either direction down the hall to get outside. Are there any agenda changes? Guess I'd like to say it's nice to see everyone all together. And I know Paul had sent the the update, and it's in the packet, but I just wanted to say it was a really big kudos to the whole group. The city council adopted the land development regulations. There was a lot of work. And for them to pass unanimously is a big deal. So they clearly are kind of trusting us and listening to us and taking our work seriously, and that's not the case in all communities. So I'm really just happy that we can kind of have that relationship. And I know we'll be addressing part of that later in the agenda as well. The few items.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, and thank you, Tim. And for being here. I think that's really helpful that you're kind of experiencing these conversations we're having. And yeah, thank you. And thank you to staff, which we would not be able to do a fraction of the work without you.
Thank you.
That's for sure.
Okay, well, I guess I skipped ahead for a little bit of an announcement, but do we have any public items that are not related to the agenda?
Nope.
Okay, seems like we are not seeing any in the audience or online. So does anyone have any announcements? Paul?
Not an announcement, Yep. Question. A couple questions, for Paul. Just in terms of a Shelburne Road update, what's happening with Denny's and with Palace 9?
Pardon me. With the Denny's. Oh, Denny's. So there, a entity has come in and received an approval to split that into 2 retail type spaces at the Denny's. So they are doing the fit up work now.
Yeah, I noticed there's
so there's work going on, and the space will be filled in the not too distant future. So that's great.
Yeah.
Have not heard any recent update on Palace 9 other than the property owner is Joe Larkin of Larkin Realty that have built the work around it. The building lease has been with Merrill Jarvis, who has the other movie theaters or theater in the area. I don't know the details other than I know that they've been in regular communication for a while on the subject.
The Palace 9 building?
The Palace 9, yes.
That's elevator 802, isn't it? The hockey training.
Is that what's happening?
Yeah.
It's
What is it?
what? It's turned into.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's
elevator
right.
802.
Sorry, I forgot that they're doing it. They're doing indoor hockey there.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah, no, that's that. They're
that's what I just said.
Yeah, they're doing
get
a complete
Duncan
refit in that building.
What kind of hockey?
Hockey.
What kind
Ice
of hockey?
hockey?
Ice hockey.
Ice hockey?
Oh, they got a It's gonna be a rink in there.
They're gonna have a smaller rink. It's gonna be like the size of the patch ice at Letty.
Huh.
Yeah, and they're gonna have gym
Yes.
the whole night.
Thank you, Duncan. I
Yes.
completely forgot about that.
Yes,
So they took the seats out and put an ice rink in. Wow.
they're in the process.
Weird
of doing it.
retrofit, but cool.
Yeah.
I'm impressed.
Down to one movie theater, right? Or do we have none?
Uh,
Two? Oh, Essex and.
Roxy and.
Roxy's going.
Okay.
Roxy closed.
No Roxy anymore either.
So it's Majestic 10 in Essex then.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hmm.
So we're all in
Um,
peace.
And then also, Paula, just our graffiti friends.
The pawn property.
The work is ongoing. So the latest, I don't know, remember the last time I updated you, but the property owner has 2 parallel tracks that they've been following. They initially got they submitted an application to the DRB. I think I mentioned some of this before. They did not meet our inclusionary requirements or requirements related to an ATM. That project was denied. That was appealed to the environmental court. At the same time, they submitted a fresh application to the city's DRB that resolved those 2 issues. They got an approval from the DRB. They then got a month after the approval from the DRB, the environmental court came to the same conclusion as our DRB had come to and denied the project. They are following 2 parallel tracks where they've been moving forward on the paperwork associated with the approval, and they appealed the other decision to the Supreme Court. So no action, no physical activity happening yet, but lots of stuff happening. And the ball is in their court on which path they want to be pursuing, but at this time, it seems both.
Are they related to Jeff Nick? A little path that seems to be popular. I do
Not.
have a question too. I don't know if this, but I'm just curious, do you typically or can you update the planning commission and potentially the city council when projects are kind of underway? People are always asking, oh, what's going in there? And we never know. And I mean, you can't spill the beans if they haven't.
Right, we can only share, right, we can only share what's, what they've formally submitted.
Right.
And then, ideally when they've got approvals, because sometimes people submit and then don't do a thing, and that gets people, excited and then not following through, but,
Right.
yeah, I
But
mean, I
I
think
just
that's a
think
good
that
community
is
interest subject.
To have people have us know what's kind of on the blocks as we think about, making changes and the impact. If you don't know what the impact potentially can be.
Okay.
You
Let
can't
me-
use it in your.
Let me think about that with our team to figure out how we could most efficiently do that and keep.
Yeah, I would
everybody- yeah.
appreciate that, because people ask me and I'm like.
So then preemptively, there's, you see there's a lot of work happening in front of the DoubleTree, former Sheridan. That's a 4-story new addition that will be connected by a sky bridge to the now DoubleTree, former Sheridan along Williston Road.
Oh,
So there's a big giant pit there right now, but that's gonna be, it's in the form-based code, so it's right up against the street. It's gonna have a plaza area just west of it towards Burlington. That will sort of create, we think, a really nice streetscape there and help to have it not just be a big giant parking lot in front of the building, which is what it has been. They're gonna be tearing down a portion of the hotel that was very undersized, the rooms, and that they hadn't really been using very much of, as one of the original parts of the building, so.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's the old Sheraton.
the old Sheridan, yeah.
Keep changing their names and I forget which is which. Oh, that's interesting.
They
Didn't
did
go
a
down that way.
Sky Bridge.
Yeah, so on the, at the second or third story, they're gonna connect the new building to the old building because they still have to do circulation of emergency vehicles and parking underneath.
Mhm.
And they wanted to have connected building for visitors who come during our winter presumably. And to have one security, one check-in desk,
Mhm.
therefore, yeah,
My questions too came from other people too.
Okay,
like
that's good feedback.
People ask me to, yeah.
okay.
I
Yeah,
think-
that's
I
good
think
feedback
that's
and we'll
great.
come up with a game plan and get it out there. Including, the first thing that comes to mind is to think about how do we include that in city news too, because that gets out to so many people in the community and. Yeah, okay.
Any other announcements or items? Any other staff items?
Just one, which is, I just wanted to be checking in with everybody. Your next meeting is 2 weeks from tonight, which is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. I just wanted to see if we had a quorum for that meeting, if anybody won't be in town for that week,
So it's November 26th.
right?
And
It's
it's
the Tuesday prior to the Thursday Thanksgiving.
I will not be able to attend. I will not be able to attend.
I will attend.
I
I'll
will
be here.
not be here.
So no, Michael,
I'll be here.
and. Okay, so we still have a
Colin.
and.
So no Colin, no Michael, but everybody else, as far as you know? All right,
And I
And-
won't be at the first December meeting either.
Yeah, and then,
you will not be.
I'm sorry, I won't be in person. I will join in remotely.
Okay.
so and then December 10th,
Yeah.
and then we,
Not be at that.
okay, so we, okay,
No.
so we have one down for December
Okay.
10th. And then just to finish out that thought, we do not have one the week of Christmas, just to like say it out loud. Okay.
Planning
Great.
Commission, Christmas Eve.
I guess, I don't know if this is a thing to bring up under other business or here, but the second page of our agenda always has these virtual meeting public participation guidelines, and I think we don't operate like this anymore. This was pretty specific to COVID when we were all on like, this page. Like it's got a bunch of text and it's supposed to give info. Well, I know probably a lot of people don't, but I was realizing that we've kind of reverted back to like our previous interactions with the public of like calling people in the audience and people generally keeping their videos off. And it makes me wonder if we should, it's, just not tonight, obviously, but at some point in the next while, just revisit these guidelines because
I
it's
think that'd
not.
be a good idea, especially because we're where we're at now and likely for forever.
You're about item 5, right?
The what?
Item
No.
5.
It's not item 5, it's the next page. It's like,
It's
directions
these.
how to behave.
get the guidelines. So this is not part of our agenda. I'm just bringing it up kind of under,
Yeah, the backside of that page, yeah.
is that,
No, see it on the
it's on the screen right now.
screen.
Yeah. No, it's not an exciting topic, but it feels important.
No,
for
it feels a little out of
public-
date because now the policy is hybrid meetings. And so this is technically virtual meeting guidelines. So Jessica, do you want how do you feel if maybe if you and I coordinate on
Yeah, I think
on a
that'd be good.
draft to everybody and then you can all
I
respond?
just felt like maybe it was something to just bring up publicly before we. I guess I was also thinking about this because I was reading the minutes from last meeting about being more accessible to the public, and I think making sure our instructions are up to date might help someone who's new to our meeting.
Maybe we could find a way for it not to be a 6-point font and a full page
Right.
Yeah,
of long text too.
yes. So, I mean, I don't know if this is something that even should be like looked at by those consultants who are thinking about accessibility, but this doesn't feel very accessible and it's kind of a little bit of misinformation right now, so. Okay, so Paul and I
Okay.
will tackle that. Okay, and now we can move on to item 5, which is our LDR 2401 through 2410 adoption and council follow-up.
So as Jessica indicated, the council adopted the regulations unanimously and with a great deal of thanks for you all. They had a few follow-up items that came up that I flagged in here. A couple of them were in the course of their discussion. Letter C came up over the course of their discussion of things that they'd like you all to look at. A couple of those you already have in your work plan, like the medium scale neighborhood is already something you just approved a project charge for. I don't think you had really spent any time talking about the 100-foot maximum distance between on homes in the NRP and the minimum maximum lot coverage subject, but that's something that they asked that it was not a formal motion, but expressions of interest in your following up on that. And then there were 2 items in a formal motion I included the letter from UVM. It turns out somehow, somewhere along the line, as we were getting the maps updated, related to the habitat blocks, that a little chunk of land off Spear Street, just north of Swift Street, somehow wound up getting an NRP zoning, even though it's, half an acre and it's completely disconnected from any other. It was just a mapping error that occurred, but it went through all of the public hearings, and so we didn't feel comfortable just removing it, because anybody who's looking at public hearings would say, well, that was in the planning commission public hearing, it was in the council public hearing, so the council didn't want to delay the adoption of the regulations for something that was technical, and UVM was comfortable with that, so they directed you in the next round of amendments to make that correction. And then there's the second one related to the definition of the educational support facility that the council wanted you to look into and come back with any changes that you want to come back with. That's not a mandate to make a specific change, but it's a request for you to explore the subject.
As a
Leave
matter
this
of,
into your work plan.
as a matter of interest, that little parcel and the one that it's adjoined to are both contiguous with the Edland Forest, which is AI.
Yes.
But it makes sense.
What
not to have-
happened in this instance was, if you recall, our old zoning used to say that if your property was more than 70% covered by a habitat block, you could build on 30% of it. Because of the change that took place in Act 47, and in order to align water and sewer areas, you all determined the 30% to remove. This little spot is the 30% that was to be removed, but then it accidentally got an NRP tag to it, which of course is counted.
No,
at the point.
I agree, it should be changed.
Yeah.
But I had another question, or not, wasn't my question, but Councillor Chalnick had raised an issue at the city council meeting about the potential for extremely high density, given our latest iteration of lot size, I suppose, but in theory, you could have something like over 50 units per acre if you go by the 4 units per, not 50 units per acre. If you divide an acre into 5,000 square foot lots and put 2 fourplexes on it, you're going to get pretty high. You're going to get well over 50. So he had a concern about that. That would be, well, wouldn't be practical. It wouldn't be beautiful. It would be a mess. So he didn't give us suggest what we might do about it, but I don't know whether there's some way of obviating that outcome, like a maximum. I know we had a cap before, but it was very low. In the old conservation PUD, we had a cap of 6. That's obviously not going to fly, but something.
Is that C3 on this
No,
list, or is
that was a
different?
concern raised by Councillor Chalnick, but no other councillors expressed that, and so I didn't include every item that individual councillors spoke to. I only referenced ones where at least 2 and probably 3 in each case spoke
Okay.
to. So
I see.
acknowledged, and I didn't feel it was representative to speak to each councillor's individual comments. But absolutely that was shared by Councillor Chalmers.
So the 3 listed here reflect at least 2 counselors, or?
So I guess what I can say is
Everybody
A and B were passed as a motion 5-0 by council.
Mhm.
C represents the dialogue that took place and
Okay.
a lot of head nodding. So my interpretation was that at least 3 councillors were interested in seeing this subject area, but there was no formal action. So if I'm off by 1 when I say at least 3, it might have been 4, it might have been 2 in some cases, but it was a lot of head nodding on all those subjects.
I guess so, Paul and Michael, what Michael's describing sounds very similar to C3. Like what What do you see as the difference?
So the
between
difference
what-
in C3 is, this was something also raised by Councillor Chalmers, where the question was, as parcels get larger, so if you imagine, in the low scale neighborhood, if it's a, say 1 acre parcel and somebody was choosing to build a single unit building on that, that single unit building could in theory be, 20,000 square foot building with 18 parking spaces and a 9-car garage to go with it, because the lot coverage remains the same. So it's not about density of development, it's about intensity of a use
Mhm.
of somebody sort of, if they weren't to divide it and put it into more housing, then it could be a monstrous scale of a single unit or two unit building. So while we're thinking of a fourplex being this, what if the fourplex was this? That was that concern that others shared of, is there a way to sort of have it scale as you go larger, but then if you were to subdivide it, which you're legally allowed to do, then you'd be allowed to do the small ones again. It was really about monstrously large individual buildings and the coverage with it.
Huh?
On CII, exploring the 100-foot maximum, is that the same discussion that we heard?
Yeah.
And so they want us to explore making it more than 100 feet or less?
They would like you to explore it to be allowed to be more,
More,
but they
okay,
did not give a directive as to what your conclusion should be.
right, okay.
So you
'Cause
could
we
conclude to say that
kind
you're
of-
happy with it as it is, or it should be smaller, but they were asked you to explore the feedback that the individual had given, wanting to see more separation.
Okay. Thank you.
That referred also to the carve out. There was a discussion with a landowner who wanted to take advantage of the 2 acre carve out, but he ran afoul of that whatever he built must be within 100 feet, or is it 300 feet? No, 100 feet of the house he's living in now.
Right,
So
okay. And we didn't do anything about it, we just heard them, yeah.
Well, we also heard it after we had our.
Right,
draft
well, right,
already
it was-
finished,
it
so it
was
felt like a
kind
very
of a-
different subject related to anything.
No,
that
no,
we had-
I.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I don't think we were trying to ignore the person. We were at a very strange point in the
Timing.
process at that point, so.
it's, by the way, I think that's 100-foot minimum, not maximum.
It is a maximum. So in the NRP, you can build up to 3 homes if you have 15 acres. The homes can be separated by no more than 100 feet from
Yeah.
one another.
it makes them closer together, that was his complaint.
Yep. I like-
Okay,
Because we asked him, he had a solution that we talked to him about, but he didn't like the solution because he didn't want the houses to be so close together.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, how we left it with him.
I was a little confused, so the carve out wasn't applicable there? Cause isn't this like 2 homes in the same lot? I thought the carve out was sort of our solution to this.
Yeah, but the 100-foot still applies.
It does for a carve out?
Well, so this is within the Natural Resource Protection Zoning District.
Okay.
And so the Natural Resource Protection District doesn't have these things like the carve out in it.
Oh, okay.
Because the primary goal of the Natural Resource Protection District is natural resource
Gotcha,
protection.
gotcha.
Any housing that's allowed is in the very constrained one home, one building if you have fewer than 15 acres,
And
3 buildings total if you have more than 15 acres of
Two
land and
spaces,
clusters.
Gotcha.
So it,
Well,
it-
Carve out is not applicable.
clearly we're
right,
interested.
in all the residential districts, this is really a conservation district
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
that has an allowance for
Yeah,
housing.
I misspoke about the carve out, yeah. It's that he has 44 acres, I think it is, so he gets.
So we'll add these ones into, we'll weave them into your work plan. The first 2, which the council did ask to be in this next round, we'll make sure that we put up front because they asked to be included in this next round of amendments, and the other ones we will weave in, we'll add it to your work plan and weave it in.
Great, thank you. Okay, anything else on that, or are we moving on to city center? Okay, we'll move into item 6, city center form-based code. Next steps and update.
Thanks, folks. So I'll be talking about this for the most part. So tonight, what we're going to talk about is an update to the project that has been investigating the form-based code and its performance and where we're going to go with that. And where I'm going to talk about some initial ideas for policy proposals that have come out of that.
Nick, can you put your speaker near your mouth?
Sure. Yeah. And then, so yeah, we're going to take a look at some of these initial, go over some of the research, take a look at some of the initial policy proposals that have started to emerge from that, and then hopefully get some feedback from you folks about where those proposals are landing and what you think about them. So let's get started. So for the last year or so, myself, Paul, and Greg Rabideau, our consulting architect, have been looking at the form-based code, and especially through the lens of some of the issues that this body raised when this project was initially scoped. So some of those the issues that were raised were the sameness or perceived sameness of buildings that had been built and planned with regards to their architectural stylings, how they related to one another, and other surrounding buildings. There were some concerns about how well these new buildings were functioning within the streetscape and how well they were tied into pedestrian facilities like sidewalks and multi-use paths, as well as the streets and just the overall street network grid itself. And there were some concerns, some local concerns and opportunities that were mentioned about the east end of Market Street, the kind of housing and buildings that this body felt would be most appropriate there. And then some open-ended questions were also raised. You know, what does the form-based code look like going into the future with large properties such as the Staples Plaza and the U Mall, eventually likely candidates for large-scale development? Does the code that we have right now serve the possibility of those being redeveloped at some point in time that we can't yet predict? So taking all of that into consideration, that considerable amount, Greg got started on research. We provided you folks with an update a few months ago where we talked about some of the main themes that had come out of this. We have been looking at the potential of integrating existing and new types of street types, talking about adjusting height in height requirements in the form-based code area, and talk about we're also starting to talk about setting a more standard grid and lining up some sort of like fuzzy connections along in the street grid. And also, most importantly, and the thing that we're going to be talking about the most tonight is to increase some flexibility in the building standards so that designers would be able to bring their A game to making buildings work, function, look beautiful, last into the future. So what we're really talking about tonight mostly addresses those first two bullets. So the look and the feel of buildings and how they are designed and advanced through our development review process, and also how that relates to building height. So I think before we get started talking about those in great detail, it's probably important to look a little bit back at the city center as an urban system. You know, this is not only just the area with a form-based code and that's just close to City Hall. It's also the area that contains most of the tax increment financing district. It's where our state designations are active and are drawing in investment from the private sector, allowing tax breaks for existing owners, and giving us more local control over our streets and some of our zoning districts. So we have this tremendous opportunity to be encouraging the kind of growth that South Burlington wants and needs and has been planning for in the comprehensive plan, and in a number of the implementation plans that have come out of our climate action plan as well. Those include, densifying housing, creating and strengthening a transportation network that allow people to get around without a car on public transportation, and updating a broad variety of infrastructure. So for a city center to work as an urban system and to work as an important, distinct, and high functioning part of the city as a whole, we need to make sure that the kinds of investments that these types of tools are designed to attract are able to occur. And so we've been looking for pain points, areas where developers are finding it difficult to work with our regulations and bring forward the kinds of designs that we want to see more of as well. We had a couple roundtables with designers and then with another one with developers, mostly folks who work more in the project management and conceptual stages of developing, as well as the financing part. We heard some really interesting things from them. And one of the things that we heard most clearly, especially from the design folks, was that our current system for evaluating buildings within the form-based code, mostly the building envelope standards, how high something needs to be, how built out it needs to be to the street, the number of building breaks and doorways, all these sorts of, geometric, quantitative regulations about the building sort of basic design. We're creating these pinch points where they were having trouble navigating. They were having trouble, for instance, meeting like a 30% facade or glazing requirement on a primary facade, getting really, really close to 28.4%, but not quite to 30% without having to change large parts of their overall building design. Similar things for we heard similar feedback on doorway spacing. People would be saying, this doorway spacing minimum it doesn't line up for the size of apartments that we want to build or the commercial spaces that we have envisioned. Yet we mandate these things to be to occur in most of the in our buildings, and they have started to create. We're hearing reported areas where designers are being forced into doing stuff that they feel is contradictory to the success of a building as a whole, and can actually have some sort of counterintuitively can be making these buildings that are meant for function or flexibility less so. So we took that in mind. We also, balanced some of their feedback against the original goals of the project and what we know about our own code and whatnot. And we've come up with some initial policy proposals, and I want to walk you through those two right now. So, sorry, Paul.
Just the first one, have the discussion, then we'll go to the second one.
Yeah, that works for me. Sure. So the first policy proposal we have that emerged from this research phase was to recommend that the current building envelope standards be, which are rigid minimums expressed in numbers, be replaced with something more flexible. And what we're recommending is a points-based design review process that would essentially deconstruct the building envelope standards into different categories and then award points for excellence in design for the projects that go above and beyond in certain or all categories, hopefully. And the way it would work is that the number of points, it would be required, each project would be required to score a minimum number of points. We're working with the number 10 at the moment, though that might change. In fact, all points that we're going to name here are really just placeholders for discussion's sake, so please keep that in mind. But what we would require is that each building or project accumulate a minimum number of points, and then also require that each category have its own minimum number of points. So you'd have to score broadly as well as deeply in order to be able to get your project approved. This would make sure that we still are, that each building and each project has a broad variety of the types of different elements that are important for a building. So street interaction, some kind of distinct roof profile and break, some kind of facade requirement that makes it visually appealing and not some kind of monolithic structure. And some kind of outdoor public or civic amenity that is built into the building or tied in with its overall site design. Within these, though, we feel that there is room for if not interpretation, there's room for choice as to which exact method of providing these goods is the most appropriate for that site, that building, that designer, and all the other various, variables that go into how a building might be ultimately designed and built out. The purpose of having an overall point accumulation that is higher than the total of the minimums for each category is that we don't want people just doing one little bit from each category, calling it a day and building a building that adds up to nothing. We want to make sure that they are still challenged to bring their best and to build to what is actually being demanded of them by their community, by the environment, by the site itself, and by the time that they are building it, designing it in. And so we feel that this structure allows for greater choice while still holding developers and designers to the minimums for all the elements that this body and others have, our overall regulations have expressed are being the sort of the core values, the things that we can't live without from each project. So that would be the basic structure of how this works.
Nick, could you elaborate a little bit on street interaction?
Yeah, sure. So street interaction is
What is included? And there's a
yeah.
question in which was the scoring will be done by the DRB.
Right now, Michael, the whole form-based code is administrative. So we would, as drafted, still look to have it be administrative.
Okay.
There are components, as you look at these points, this is a little bit conceptual at our stage right now, but as we look at these points, our goal would be for it to be very clear, because under state law, for something to be administrative, it has to be, there's not an interpretation, but there's different ways to be very clear. So one way may be numerical, like the door spacing standard right now that says it's 26 feet or something like that. Another way to be clear might be to define the characteristics of a grand entrance, for example. So a grand entrance plays the most prominent role in the building. I'm making words up right now, but it is the most prominent role in the building. It is its components reach to the top of the floor. It's wider than it is tall. The doors are typically extended width, and it is a focal point, etc. And then maybe have some illustrations of different versions of this, and then say anything that meets those criteria, applicant, you're good to go. So it might be another way to be clear without being numerical.
And what does the builder or developer or owner get for these points?
So in the structure, there would be a minimum number of points necessary. So let's say there's 4 categories. For simplicity's sake, let's say doing a base level of any of these things gets you 1 point each. So there's 4 points. You still would need to potentially get 6 more points total. So you could pick and choose from amongst these other things.
Could accumulate points by picking from a menu of.
Right. And then the other part of the conversation with you all is that points can also be used to create a race upwards. So what could the city offer to make somebody want to achieve more points? So let's say there's a minimum of 10. What happens if you decide to make a building that has 15 points, that is above and beyond the minimum? How do we reward you for going above and beyond the minimum? And we have a twist on that we'll talk about when we get to heights.
That's right.
Donna?
Yeah, I think, you've hit on many of the topics that I think we talked about. There's one that's not on here.
And that's why we're here to talk with you all.
That was that we felt like all the buildings that were built were quite large footprints, and that there was a real need to have some smaller footprint buildings, not necessarily fewer units, but perhaps fewer units with the same entry. A smaller, and since basically we're building on what's left over at this point, it seems like it makes sense that, there is the ability to, and also some of these odder shaped lots, that smaller buildings are going to make sense. And and, you know, we did hear from one of the developers came in and said on this particular site, he said he'd like to see 12 units per building. Yeah, I think that would be a good idea to have, you know, instead of 50 or 60 units per building, to have, you know, 8, 12, 16 units per building in a taller footprint, but a smaller footprint, but perhaps a taller building. And that would give you a little bit more diversity of building types. And with smaller buildings, you can also perhaps create a little more interesting street facades because they're different buildings. It's not all just kind
Something
of
like a
decorate.
brownstone in New York where they on Arrow.
Sort of what a lot of us were picturing at the
Yeah.
time, you know, a lot of, because, you know, the discussion about the, you know, the space between building entries, it was kind of assuming much smaller buildings, you know, tall buildings, but not necessarily large, you know, really large buildings. And so I think that's still missing from this, you know, that diversity of footprints and, you know,
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I think that's, first of all, there are a few, I think, specifics that we haven't included in this quite yet because we wanted to kind of run this overall structure by the commission because, you know, we kind of realized once we got to this point that this could potentially address so many of the discrete topics that were originally scoped in this project that we felt like we should probably bring this before the planning commission approval and make sure we were on the right track of it. This footprint of buildings, and what I think you're talking about is kind of what a lot of folks call the missing middle housing, where it's somewhere between it may have elements of a larger apartment building, but maybe not the same unit density in that actual building. We have,
I don't think that's usually what people refer to as the missing middle. That has more to do with cost of units. You know, and
I've heard it used both. I've used it both ways, I think.
Both ways?
Yeah, I have
Okay.
heard that before. In some
yeah, it's a size building that you don't see built much anymore,
mhm.
but you know, I think there is in older cities, you see a lot of that kind of building. It's
You-
predominantly
You do,
that
you do.
size building.
So sorry.
there is one comment I guess I want to make in this, maybe just a miniature small null that sorry, this is one issue I've been made aware of, that why you don't get those as much anymore is that I may be wrong with this. My understanding is most areas, including South Burlington, if you have a multifamily unit that's 4 stories, you need 2 distinct stairwells, which means that you kind of have a certain minimum amount of space interiorly, and they all of you need access to both the stairwells. You kind of can't have a single stairwell with multiple units kind of coming off a single landing. So it means that you kind of lose a lot more interior space relatively as the building gets smaller. And with those brownstones going up, those regulations didn't exist. And I've heard the argument made that the regulations went in to try to reduce essentially fire reasons, though arguably with modern building materials, that's less of a hazard than it was, a century ago when the regulations went in. But you can sort of see it in, I believe, in the buildings going up near the Market 32 and the Shaws. You've got this, it's like 4 units per floor, and then it's like 4 floors, like 8 units, and like some office space and some what's it called, and some commercial space on the ground floor. But if you start looking at the floor plan, you essentially have 2 giant stairwells like 20 feet from each other, which means there's a pretty big gap in the middle of the building, but there's just nothing there, just stairwells, multiple stairwells. And that, I do think, is part of why those smaller ones, like buildings like that, are less common, not impossible, but it's something, I guess, to be aware of. They 4 brownstone, 1 unit on each floor, I don't think is legal currently from fire code regulations, which I don't know, that might be.
Those are kind of technicalities. I mean, it's like, it all comes down to economics.
Exactly, what makes the economics.
And it has more to do with the elevators and the current elevator code in South Burlington alone.
Yeah.
Reinforce that we're the
So
only.
Chuck,
But I guess
ones
my
that
point in trying to make is that technology matter, because if it comes down to economics and it's sort of a make or break kind of thing, you're gonna want to go with a building that allows you to kind of break even versus
Well,
one that's hard to make.
we did
Can
when we were
we-
talking about the development near the lakeside. That he was very specific that he was looking at 12-unit buildings. And so I think that there's a way to do this economically. It's just,
So could you go to the facade one? Facade and building breaks.
Yeah, certainly.
So I know it's skipping ahead, Paul, to like a couple sections ahead, but the reason I say that is because the point of this section, I think, is to create the illusion of what Donna is saying is missing. So I wonder if maybe even in this section, you could actually get more credit by actually providing separate buildings, because it's kind of almost what this is trying to create the illusion of. I mean, isn't that the whole point of like creating building breaks and making it look like there's different buildings next to each other?
That's,
Like, they're not actually doing it, which is what you're saying,
Right,
actually
right.
do it, but
they
maybe,
just wanted to make it look like
Having-
it's smaller buildings where they could be smaller.
but maybe some of the points, you could get points here for actually having smaller buildings.
yeah, so
I don't know.
Because that's what we're trying to emphasize. You know, we're trying to create something that's different than what's already there. Isn't that the whole point of this?
Yeah, it's not a bad idea, I think.
I don't. If that's something we think would add to the streetscape by having differences, then
Oh, yeah.
maybe it could go.
So part of, I think maybe we hit on, one of the reasons why we wanted to bring this proposal here now at this point is because feedback like this is, we're hoping is easily integrated into a flexible, system like this. So if more, if a sort of a deconstructed design with more buildings occupying a single lot or just smaller buildings in general is something that we want to be rewarding through a race to the top system that rewards exemplary designs, then I think that that's really useful feedback, and we can bring back something that addresses that more directly.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted,
I just want to make sure, I'm not saying just smaller, because I know we'll talk about height, just maybe diversity of footprint, I think is what Donna was saying, so I wouldn't want that to be misinterpreted as like one teeny short,
Yeah,
one-story
yeah.
building.
Yeah.
But like,
certainly, yeah,
just to be clear.
yeah,
And along with the, smaller footprint, allowing for some zero lot lines, so that you could have, so that you can have buildings look like they have the same massing, but, some offsets and things like that. But it would allow you to have multiple building entrances, not just a facade that's broken up into different parts, but just physically different buildings, but connected.
mhm, mhm.
Physically connected. They could even have, I mean, you can have I forget what it's called now, but a point of egress, if you can't have a second stairway, that you can have an entrance, you can have an exit into another building,
Mhm.
Into an adjacent building or something. There's so many different ways you can do it. So I wouldn't limit, I'd let the designers kind of come up with ways of utilizing this, but to emphasize the importance of having some smaller building footprints.
Well, I
Yeah,
think
you
that's a fair point to just bring up. You gave an idea, Jessica, of smaller footprint. Another one might be, there's nothing that prohibits a 0 foot setback currently in the T4, T5. We just haven't seen any built.
Mhm.
Maybe there's an option in there to say, if you choose to make and essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's essentially a fire separation exists between two buildings that are attached. Maybe that's a way to get points, is to have a separate building that happens to be physically attached. And, I don't know if we want to get it quite into the level of detail of the emergency egress, but that kind of thing being not just allowed, but being encouraged to be part of the variety. But can you speak to the
The-
lot lines briefly and lots?
Yeah, so, one of the things that our consultants report is looking at is the transition to infill and small lot development that is going to be happening regardless because of just the economics of this area. Unless a bunch of people start selling lots to one another and merging them, it's going to be a lot of small lots being developed, piecemeal or individual projects. And so we wrote this or suggested this policy in large part with that in mind, so that a smaller building could have more options for where it locates its entrances, for instance, rather than having them mandated at a particular spacing, as well as facade requirements, that, you know, as standard facade requirements. So we actually see a move towards a system like this one, this one suggested, as one that would unlock the potential of smaller parcels to host buildings that would be compliant with form-based code, and indeed would be performing closer to where we're really hoping them to be, you know, into the future.
Yeah.
Michael and then Paul.
Yeah, I wanted to refer back to Colin's description of the house with two staircases. They are, it's quite an efficient layout for, as far as the footprint is concerned, because you have, and each of the two has can have 4 levels and a basement, and there are thousands of them in Montreal. Or you have one on top of the other, and you have one staircase that goes to the upper, but you have a common entrance and then 2 doors. One goes up and one is on that level. It's also a very efficient use of land. And it's very, very urban. You know, it's a cityscape that's familiar all over the place.
Well, yeah, I think I agree. That's an interesting form. I think we might be talking about 2 slightly different things here. In this case, we're talking this story. It's 4 stories high, and you have one entrance leading to, or 2 internal ones that basically all go to the same 4 landings.
Yep.
Versus in New York City, where I've seen a lot of are just one staircase going to 4 landings, and then the space that would be taken up by the other staircase is just a bed or something. I think that's more the point I was trying to make.
Oh, you mean that would be a single dwelling unit, not 2?
Yeah, I was saying a lot of the classic brownstones are
Yeah.
like skinny and one staircase internally, and that is trick. But I think perhaps I'm not aware of some of the alternative egress things, but that is, does sort of make smaller.
That small the key is very small footprint.
Yes,
Buildings are.
but that's what we're talking. Yeah,
They're narrow.
But no, I guess perhaps I am not an expert on the alternate ways of perhaps complying with that kind of requirement.
Paul.
Since this will require a change in the land development regulations, then we will be having public hearings then on this. And will Greg meet with us before the public hearings?
So the plan is that tonight we're gathering some initial feedback. We're getting your questions. What are subject areas that you need to have looked at? Your first meeting in December, Greg is going to join us, and once he knows what some of your questions and concerns are, he can think about them a little bit, and then he'll be there as your expert at your December 12th.
I'm glad to hear that Greg's going to, because my root question tonight was going to be, why are you keeping Greg sequestered?
So you're not keeping him sequestered. He is scheduled to come.
So, and the public hearings will be after the first of the year then, probably. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have just a kind of a question about how this works. So this looks like it's set up to say like what the current standard is. And then for each of these sections, it gives a list for alternative compliance. So, and then there's points. Like, do you get points for the minimum standard and or the alternative compliance, or you just required to do them?
Yeah,
No matter with 0 points.
That's a great question, Jessica. Thank you. I think it's still a little in flux, the actual mechanism of how it's supposed to work. The function though, the outcome that we want is that something from each category gets done. Now that may be, the planning commission's feedback may be that there are some things that just every building needs to have, like specific things. Let's say for the sake of argument, that's every building needs to have a skylight. So in the, glazing category, the basic requirement is you have to do a skylight, and everything else can be something else. I'm just using that as something that we would never actually require for the sake of argument. Using that as an example, the the add-ons or the alternative compliance could be, you do, instead of one big skylight, you do a bunch of different smaller skylights. That could be alternative compliance. That could be worth the same amount of points. Or it could be that, you install for extra points, you do the basic regular skylight and then you just add on extras, or you have some kind of other glazing and window scheme that you add to the primary and secondary facades or something along those lines. Something in the same category, something that achieves a similar function and a similar purpose, but maybe does it with a little extra aesthetic flair. Maybe costs a little bit more, maybe uses premium materials. Maybe just kind of does more of the thing that we already want to require, but goes beyond what we recognize as like the minimum that we should be asking people. So I know it's a bit of a vague answer, but the fact is like I think we're going to be refining the mechanisms of this a little bit based on what we hear is truly important and what cannot be missed versus what the planning commission feels like is more substitutable for one another. Where the planning commission feels like more choice is something that they want to reward, and where the planning commission feels like we want to be more prescriptive.
Can I
I guess just to really very clearly just make sure we understand that. So what we should be doing is looking at the current standard and then giving you feedback if it's okay if somebody alternatively does, say, a grand entrance or on it.
So
as a-
yes, we'd like to start one step above that though.
Yeah.
So likely, Nick's absolutely right. Likely, using this as an example, doing the minimum door spacing that is in the current form-based code might be worth a point. Looking at the grand entrance, maybe that's also a point, or maybe in another version of that, that's a lot more expensive to do that. Maybe that should be worth 2 points. So while it's still replacing, it's more valuable. As you go further down, some of them say, an alternative is to do a much larger step back of the building. That's an expensive thing to do. So while it is substituting, it's substituting with a lot more cost, and so it should give you more points. That's why it's still a little bit up in the air.
Yeah.
Where we'd love to start your feedback is we debated not putting the bullet points in here because where we'd like to start is these 4 broad design categories of interacting with the street, the site amenities and their interaction, the building, the facades and the heights and sort of roofs of the buildings. Are these the sort of, these are the 4 areas that Greg identified as major features of a building that make them different from one another. Donna, you shared, the size as well. Are these the right framing of the categories in your mind, and or do you want Greg to come in and at your December meeting and talk with you about those? That's, I think, the first area of feedback we'd love to get, and then broadly, are we on the right track as we think about the ways in which these 4 categories would then be articulated through a point system. So I think that's kind of where we're at for this meeting.
And I interrupted Helen, so you should.
No, I just was gonna follow up
Yeah,
with
go
yours, trying to understand the points, but I guess that isn't the point for tonight. My comment, I think the design categories are good ones. I'm curious, though, if to Donna's concern about actually, giving, support or encouraging the smaller footprint, which might require a height change, if that can be captured in that category, or is it wholly a 5th category? Do you follow me?
Yeah, I think that's an extra category, because this other thing that's occurred to me, it's a whole other category too. And you can just put it in there, put it aside somewhere, but think about it. And that is just the way the housing's structured. I read a whole book about co-housing.
Okay.
Which incorporates some of these earn additional points by the common spaces,
Yeah.
things like that. But it's also a way of having a building actually be a community where I think
Alright,
you'd have a
thank you.
hard time saying that the buildings that are there now are communities. You know, there are a lot of individual apartments where people hardly ever know each other. Because that's what apartment buildings with long hallways are. The people that you might know somebody there, but more likely you never see them.
Agreed.
Yeah, and the sort of co-housing thing, it's just a different way of, and also it has the advantage of the apartments themselves can be quite a bit smaller. Many of them are for, you know, I mean, they can be family spaces, but a lot of the apartments tend to be smaller because of the community amenity spaces.
Oh,
um,
in
in a co-housing.
co-housing, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I
you
think
tend
some
to
of
have
them
smaller kitchens,
Tried
you
to
know.
do that with the workout room or the community space, but it may not build the kind of community.
Well, and it's
Possible.
also, it's a different,
Yeah.
governmental structure, so to speak. You don't just pay rent to somebody. It's like there's an organization that lives there, that runs the building.
Yeah, but I agree. Giving a bunch of bonuses to that does seem to be consistent with a lot of what we're going for in terms of goals. So yeah, that does seem like this does seem like create a good place to put into it. I agree with you. So I'm trying to say.
Yeah, there are aspects of co-housing that,
The physical-
like a terrace, for example, which
Like what?
a terrace
Oh, a terrace.
could be maybe the top story of the building has got some larger penthouse type apartments, and there's an outdoor terrace. You'd have to have a setback for the apartment itself, but maybe access to the outside.
Sure.
You've got balconies here somewhere, but
Well, the height and roof
That's not enough.
profile suggested that.
big
Some
part-
of the roof profiles would be, farther up the building,
Mhm.
which would provide a terrace for that floor or.
Mhm.
Is community garden some kind of thing that could be integrated in
Oh.
that too? Like, like shared gardening spaces, that kind of thing. I don't know, just spitballing ideas.
So Duncan has his hand up.
Yeah, Donna, I get what you're saying about changing building envelopes and stuff, but it seems to me that asking for smaller buildings in city center seems kind of counterintuitive to what we're trying to do here.
Same number of square footage.
So, okay, all right,
Just go up.
all right, that,
Just more.
but I think you need to be careful when you say smaller buildings, because I think the perception is, no, we're trying to get as much as we can here.
I think it's a.
And if you say smaller buildings, people are gonna be like, that's not what we're, okay, all right. I think that's an important distinction.
Footprint is the distinction.
Yeah, I think that is an important
And-
distinction to make.
It feels much more like facade related, like you're standing outside and you see something that's maybe a more narrow rather than like the whole block.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I agree, Duncan. I think it's a good distinction.
So I'll address a couple of those discreetly. One of the category, or maybe it's not really an official category, but towards the end, you'll notice that there was another category-ish list of things, such as, domes, spires, other significant architectural features. This was something that Greg suggested as a sort of a fifth catch-all category, if there was something we could have a list or some description of things that would be, really interesting, bold, unusual, unique, that would add a lot to a building or a project, but we felt wouldn't be necessarily something that we needed to mandate, but would, score a decent chunk of extra points. Now, I wonder if a co-housing ownership structure, or a cooperative ownership structure, or some other element of co-housing that we wish to promote might be an appropriate thing to add to that category, and to say, this is one of those things that we're not going to mandate and really isn't substitutable for something else important, but it is something that if you wish to pursue, we're going to reward you handsomely with, easy compliance and perhaps some other kinds of incentives that I would like to talk about tonight. Yeah,
You could even leave it a little bit open-ended, if somebody else can think of something else nice that they'd like to
Exactly.
do and say, oh, do I get points for this? And
exactly.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, we were kind of hoping to leave a certain amount open for that.
No, we're saying, so wait, so what we're proposing is like sort of a fifth kind of grab, like sort of asphalt miscellaneous without any kind of minimum point requirement to it. Is that what we're sort of thinking, or would these still be categorized in the four?
It would, the idea as it stands would be just a sort of a place to earn extra points. But it's really like, I don't want to draw too much attention to it because it's really sort of the most underdeveloped area of our potential point system. This was really just one of those, wouldn't it be interesting if we could figure out some way to reward someone taking a bit of a risk and doing something that they felt strongly about, but that we would never require. And we don't think be an appropriate substitute for the things that we do require.
Duncan and then Helen.
Yeah, Colin, just a quick question from an operational context. Is the idea that I think the design categories are fairly good. Certainly open to adding one or two, but is the idea that there would be a menu that would be provided to developers within each category, and then they would select items from that menu? Or how would that?
Yeah, this is where we get into the thorny issue of this entire project, which is how to encourage and allow creativity without being overly prescriptive. You can't really prescribe creativity, but without some prescription, you get the race to the bottom. So right now we are imagining this more like TDM where there is a menu than not, but we have been talking this entire time about how to phrase things generally in like the overall strategy of how to phrase things with an eye towards, eventually codifying this in the LDRs in a way that steers with a light touch and suggests outcomes rather than prescribes them, and tries to strike a balance between describing the minimum of what we need to see and making sure that there are some standards, and also allowing designers to take that and work with what they've got, basically, whether that's a really great idea or a really good deal on some materials, or a unique site layout or something like that offers up some certain opportunities that a more standard one doesn't. We want to make sure that people have the ability to take advantage of that. But to your question, I think what we would most likely do is be more prescriptive in what is, if we're going to establish a minimum, something that cannot be deviated from, or something that can only have one or two options that could be substituted for it. That's what we would be more prescriptive with. And then we would probably be more general, or a little bit more open-ended on the sort of like points accumulation stuff, just so we're covering our bases, but still suggesting, giving some direction to where people can take, like the direction that we want people to take things to go in.
I mean, you don't want to be, as you said, too prescriptive. Otherwise, that will kill the innovation. But general categories, and let the designer or the builder or the owner fill out the detail.
Right,
And
and this is
can
this
be-
this is the tricky needle to thread of being general enough to allow them to fill out the detail, and specific enough that it meets the state law standard of being a administrative review. That it's not the staff person and the architect are having a philosophical debate about the results. So how do you be specific enough to say, what does it mean to be it's in the example, a grand entrance? Specific enough that if they propose something that qualifies, that then they get a yes. We're not.
Well, outdoor space could be a general category, for example, and let the designer figure out how to do it.
Duncan, did you finish?
Yeah.
Then Helen and then Paul.
So my question is, what are the incentives? Do you need, I guess one is what's the base requirement for points? Do you have to have, if we have 5 categories, minimum, you gotta do 5 points? And then how are we incentivizing developers or architects or whatever to make this building really special, really different?
So to answer the first question, Helen, imagine that, just for simplicity's sake, let's say that in each category you have to do at least 1 point, and that is the lowest end of the spectrum on any one of these things.
And the current standard is not one.
Let's say that's 1 point.
Oh,
So
okay.
let's say the current standard is 1 point. But that gives you 4 points. You have to get 10 for your building to be approved. So then you could choose to say, well, I've gotten 1 point from every category, but then I really believe in public space, so I'm going to get 6 more points in public space. Or I really believe in high quality architecture and materials, I'm going to get my 6 points there. So you would have your choice in, with some guidance
Mhm.
about where you get your additional points to get to your minimum total. So the idea there is to, in response to the concerns of the Planning Commission and has expressed, of always resulting in the same thing, giving some choices so that we've been thinking about something Donna said a couple of meetings ago, which was, you said, architects are always trying to do right thing by their developers. They're often given a pretty tight box to go in. And I believe your exact words were something along the lines of, if an architect gets to do one thing that is a really great add-on, and that's often where architects are today. So how do we give them the flexibility to find the one thing that matches well, that doesn't have to be the same one thing that the next door one was? And not just one thing, but building off your thought.
Pretty good.
Yeah, nice job.
So that's functionally, and then when we
Okay.
talk about incentives,
Yeah.
I think that's the next part of this conversation of what can we bring to the table that makes somebody not just want to get 10 points, but maybe wants to get 15 points, or if they already want to do 15 points, that they're being rewarded for doing so. That way the word,
Right.
and this is always the catch with these things, and that if they choose not to go above and beyond, that we're still happy with the outcome. Because somebody, by definition, above and beyond means above and beyond. And so we want to make sure that the baseline is something we're always happy with,
Uh-huh.
and that above and beyond is something that we're even happier with.
But the
Why would we give
development of
points for the minimum?
incentives- Excuse me, I'm not quite finished. The development of the incentives is sort of the next step.
We started to work on it a little bit, but we wanted to sort of, before we flesh that out entirely, and spend a lot of time on that. If we are 100% on the wrong track, this is a good time to let us know.
Thank you. I think
Paul?
Paul's next.
Yep, so form-based code is based on streetscapes and building envelopes in relationship to the transect that they're in. So what this looks like to me is streetscapes and building envelopes, and you're awarding points for people to do what my understanding was that they were supposed to do with form-based code in the first place. So, and the reward for that at the time clearly was, if you do this, then you will avoid a lot of the kinds of things that you have to go through with the DRB. That was the incentive, was, we'll give you a pass if you do what we want you to do. So that seems to have gotten lost a bit. And our intention was, with all of this, was to actually build a beautiful downtown South Burlington. That was the idea. It was a beautiful city that people would want to come to from all over the world. Like, we thought like Church Street, or like Faneuil Hall, or, any number of places that have become famous for being beautiful, attractive places that people want to come to. So it seems to me, and I think people in South Burlington feel this way, that we failed to do that we have not built a beautiful city at all, that we've built pretty much stock kind of, I would say Soviet architecture. It's just the term I use for it, but very square buildings, very plain
We
buildings.
didn't build them though.
No, we didn't build them, but I mean, we
The
had
the
people.
building
We
the
built one of
city
them.
built is different and interesting.
But-
And
Yeah,
architectural.
yeah, these two buildings, this one and Allard Square, are different. The others are all.
Okay,
And I think
let's let Paul keep
the
going.
reason we're here.
We're gonna let Paul finish his thought.
I've been not finishing my thought for 10 or 12 years now.
This is.
I'm used to it.
It's true, you're still,
But I think that what I hope what you're trying to get at with this is, gee, we really wanted to have a beautiful city. Let's try to build a beautiful city. You know, I hope that that's what your incentive is here. And my understanding is that that was what form-based code was really originally about. And I think it was people's expectation that that's what it was about. You know, I think the disappointment is, well, where's that beautiful city that we thought we were going to have, you know? So if that's the direction we're heading in, fine. But if we're headed in a direction where, well, this has been too much trouble for the builders and developers and landowners, and, you know, they did the best they could, and, you know, maybe now a point system that awards them for something, you know, then I think we're even in deeper trouble than we've been in. So, you know, I really would hope that what happened to the reward for that? I mean, did the developers get the pass that they were supposed to get? I mean, that was the idea, you know?
So, that's a really good question, Paul, and, we've gotten a lot of feedback on it, and I'd say that, there's some feedback that there are opportunities to streamline the process such that the reward of you submit a thing that is complete and that you get a shorter review. We've gotten some feedback on some ways that we can improve on that. One of the areas that we got feedback on was that designers who were looking to be a little bit creative found that determining whether that creativity was approvable or not was a slowdown in the process, which of course the developers for whom the designers are working are saying, well, then cut bait and go to the thing that we know, you know, mathematically works. And so some of the purpose here is to say, give guided flexibility so that an applicant who knows, who wants to do a thing like one of them talks about material, you know, 50% high quality brick or stonework, they know they'll get points for that period. So it's in our view, it is taking exactly what the form-based code was trying to do, and in a guided way, give clarity as to different ways to get your approval in that fast time frame. So to get that exact what you're saying. So to me, this is intended to be rooted very much in the form-based code and respond to some of the feedback that we've received that it is not clear enough today what alternate designs than what you've seen can get a quick approval.
That's too bad. Because
Well, I mean,
there have
good
been some
feedback.
nice buildings built in the meantime. I mean, that have not been in the form-based code district. There have been some nice buildings built on Sheldon Road.
Mhm.
That it looked to me like people took their understanding of form-based code and said, oh, let's build a nice looking building. You know, I think, you know, I mentioned it before, what's his name?
Joe Larkin?
Yeah, that's a nice looking building, you know.
Well,
and
you'd be
across
happy to
the-
know that that building was designed by Greg Rabideau, who's the consultant on the
Except-
project.
Yeah.
So,
Well, let's build some more of those. You know? I mean, even that new building that,
Building.
yeah,
It
yeah.
is a standalone building.
But they should have all been like that. I mean, we really, the thought was we want people to come from all over the world to our downtown because it's going to be so beautiful, you know?
I think this is an opportunity for us to revisit what the minimums are and what we're expecting, you know, because obviously those buildings that got built met our code
Yeah,
and they're not necessarily what you were expecting. So we can,
right.
you know, I think maybe that's something we can, when we're looking at these you know, options, really make sure they're things that would enhance.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of form-based code is you can really build anything you want. Yes, I mean, it's like the community wants to build this, and so this is what we'll build.
right. Well, and I think the feedback has been, Paul, that the numbers might be a little bit too tight such that it results in what appears to be sameness.
Repetition.
Yeah.
Well, but you said that this was complying with the minimum. There's nothing to stop a developer from doing more than they've done.
Mhm.
And what we haven't discussed at all is when we were developing the original form-based code, there was a lot of talk about placemaking, mainly the space between the buildings as being the what's important for community. We don't have it now. I mean, to my great shock the other day, I realized I was driving down a corridor of walls that are all the same. It's unfortunate, but once things mature, we have sidewalk cafes and the trees are bigger, and there's more activity here. The space between the buildings might be a little more inviting than it is now. But we missed an opportunity, I think. Paul would agree. With it, because without having any flexibility, a developer just had to comply with the requirements and didn't want to go out on a limb on his own and do something more. It's unfortunate, but it's the fact of life.
I don't think people would be going out on a limb. I mean, we told them what we wanted. I mean,
And that's what we got.
like brownstones. I mean, I thought that was pretty clear that that's what we were looking for. We were really looking, the towns that we were trying to imitate were the New England and Vermont towns and cities, you know, I mean, Church Street, or even, you know, St. Albans with the green, and, you know, like the old brick buildings and parks, and just, you know, so that South Burlington would look like, you know, any other city or town, only it would have been built in the 21st century with, you know, ultra modern technology. I mean, that was the idea, was to build, you know, just a really beautiful old New England city that was built in the 21st century.
Old buildings with modern materials. But the problem is the form-based code committee did not own land.
Well, here's the other thing. I mean, the form-based code, the original document was a planning document. See, now this is very much getting into architectural details.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think that's what was really missing from the first part. You know, it was establishing the planning objectives, except that it never included the pedestrian ways. I think if you wanted that to happen, I think you had to actually say where it was going to be, you know, and I think that's something that we learned.
Well, I think we always knew we had to go back and readjust form-based code, and we did shortly after it was implemented.
Yeah, and
You know,
now
some
we've
of the
had,
doorways and things, it was like, oh, this doesn't really work. So I think this is like the next step
yeah,
to make form-based codes look a little more interesting. And having lots of variety. And how you do that is, you know, how you incentivize that is, I think, a challenge. Cause it's
So
so
I
much
think-
easier to just pick something that you've done somewhere else and say, oh, I know what this can look like. I mean, you just go out to Williston.
yeah.
Done
Colin,
that a
did you
lot.
have some-
Is there any way, I'm just sort of wondering, like, it sort of seems like there's particularly our old form-based code that like people found kind of developer law found like pretty samey, more repetitive. We're looking for ways to comply with them. Is there any way of like involving this process, say, like from more kind of like almost trying to break it, like from a developer's perspective, like, oh, if we were to do this, there's a really easy way to apply it. So this, and this creates this boring block. Like, is there a way to kind of like almost involve someone who might know how to kind of almost stress test it of like, see, is it possible to make boring stuff with this new set of codes and not wait till it's already built? Like, it's, I mean, I don't think I could not do that. I don't think, because I'm on architect, you know, but like, it's like just sort of try to come up with hypothetical ways to make something crummy looking. And if it's too easy, it's not going to change something. I don't know if that's feasible or not, but it seems like that might be nice alternative than waiting 5 years. Like, oh no, we changed this, but now this bad thing's happening. You know what I mean? But I don't know if this is just fancy thinking or whatever. I guess in most things like a video game, you always hire play testers to try a new thing to see if they can break it and then revise based on how people broke it.
And I think that,
Oh, you-
I think we'd have to be really careful that we're really comfortable with the alternative compliance options, you know, like the one has like windows in what we currently ask for, but then when you look at the other ones listed below it, there's like no mention of windows, so it's like, are you allowed to just do one of these non-window options and not have to do the glazing? You know,
Right,
so
and I
stuff
think
like
that's, you
that.
know, that's for us
making
to work
sure-
through, but as an example, we require an upper stories, 30% of the upper story to be windows. Some of the feedback that we've gotten is that that pushes up really tightly to the stretch energy code. And so spacing that and making that all work basically results in the same thing every time. A solution could be to say, an option might be that you provide variety in the building in XYZ way, and in doing so, maybe your minimum windows drop to 25%. And then you maybe have, you know, smaller windows for the bathrooms or something. But what you're getting instead is, you know, more substantial building articulation or something like that. So that's one example where we specifically heard that our standard is really pushing up against.
Yep.
There's not a lot of ways to accomplish a thing when we're right up at the energy code.
It's interesting that you bring up the energy code too, because this point-based system is something that the current energy code uses. The residential energy code uses that. And so it's kind of an established method. The builders hate it, but I think architects can deal with it. You know,
good to
engineers
know.
seem to be able to deal with it okay. Builders themselves don't.
Good at adding up ones and twos.
Yeah, and the other thing, just to speak toward there, you know, there's certain parts of buildings that don't need windows. And so you shouldn't be forced to put in windows for parts of buildings that don't need them. And speaking from the standpoint of both, you know, somebody who appreciates wall murals, you know, and especially the ones in Montreal and Europe, occasionally you see these real three-dimensional murals, and there's some it just adds so much to a city to have that a blank wall of art, you know, that really makes it for a special place. So don't be afraid of blank walls, you know, you don't want a whole blank building, but don't force somebody to put windows where they don't need to be. And I'm always, as a lighting designer, looking for, you know, nice blank walls, because in Montreal, they also do this. They create murals of light, you know, and it can make for a, you know, it's something that's hard to do if you don't have some blank walls, you know, because you just cannot light buildings if they're all windows. It just doesn't happen. So that's my.
Donna, we will take your detailed suggestions on how to create better lighting design anytime. So please fire away, on that one specifically.
So
Yeah.
just looking back at the questions you'd asked, I mean, it seems like we've at least partially touched on most of the questions in this part one. Is there anything else that you were hoping for tonight before we talk with Greg the next time?
The third question is one that we haven't really touched very much on. And we're sort of just reaching the stage of thinking about how do we make this a race upwards. So, you know, what are some things that we could incentivize to reach more points? One of the ideas, for example, that Greg shared, and this is it's too early now because it doesn't exist, but we are undertaking a parking management study in City Center, and that will say in areas like north of Williston Road or along San Remo Drive may include at some point municipally owned parking lots. And so one of the ideas that Greg tossed out was maybe if you get more points, you get priority access to, you know, booking some of that publicly accessible parking for your tenants, something like that. You get priority use of it. So thinking, you know, I don't know if that one specifically is the right, is the right thing, but thinking about how do we be really creative about encouraging folks to do high quality design. Related to that, you know, we just so a few of us attended a planning conference where some developers were speaking about, you know, what are some of the subjects that they're facing, and you know, construction costs and related to certain kinds of development and scale of building is a factor that they're all facing that is making it hard to pan out numbers. So things that might traditionally have been incentives, like more height, may not actually be an incentive in the short to medium term,
Because you need more
Um,
steel beams. Yeah,
right? So you know,
An elevator, right.
we're open to creative thinking. We think that this is a really neat approach to make it a race upwards, and we're going to be continuing to speak with folks in the development community, speak with different departments of the city, speak with the community about what would excite folks to want to do even higher quality than the minimums. So-
That seems like kind of a good segue into the racing upward part 2 building heights section,
let-
if that's.
Let's take it. Let's take
Yeah,
that segue.
do that.
Yeah, sure. So, our new LDRs, allow for increased building height in other areas of the city, not in the form-based code. Along Shelburne Road notably, allowing up to 7 stories. That is higher than anything that's currently allowed in the form-based code. So considering that fact, as well as you'll notice on page 4 of the memo, there's a chart titled New Buildings Approved in City Center by Stories. We're seeing a clear trend that in the form-based code areas, the most buildings are being built to 4 stories already, which is above the minimums. And so between those two facts, and with a few other things in mind that we'll talk about, we're offering the following suggestions as far as height. Raise building minimum heights as per part 2. Raise minimum stories. So that would be in T3 and T3 plus.
No.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Raise minimum stories to 3 stories across the board. And then
In
and
T4
sorry,
and T5,
sorry,
not in
T3.
T3.
Yeah, sorry. This has
Yeah.
been an evolving one. Yeah, raise to T4 and T5, and then allow a maximum stories count of 14 stories. The reason for this is, well, a number of reasons. I've already sort of touched on some of them. First of all, we're seeing this would bring the form-based code area in line maximum wise with the rest of the city. It would also mean that developers would be able to start thinking broadly about larger, taller projects in the densest area of the city. As far as minimums go, this would allow us to create an incentive to build below 3 stories. And we could then apply that incentive to the aforementioned flexible point system. That could be one of the incentives that a developer could pursue for a higher scoring building, the ability to build down to 2 stories from an established minimum of 3.
So with enough little add-ons, you could go from 3 stories to 2 stories.
Yeah, you can imagine a building that has some kind of exemplary design. Let's say it has some,
Oh.
yeah,
Yeah,
whatever that ends up looking like, might be able to take advantage of that exemplary design to leverage that into a smaller overall, requirement for the building.
So that just to interject super quickly, that's an example in our heads of how do we create a win-win. We win if it's 3 stories because it's more the form. We win if it's not quite the scale, but it is a higher quality.
Maybe clarification, I'm non-developer. So making a smaller building we're rewarding people by allowing them to build a shorter building.
I wouldn't
I'm
call
confused
it
how
a
that's
reward. So I think we're trying to sort of flip the whole conversation on its head. We're saying 3 stories becomes the minimum. If for some reason you're hard
Okay,
set on a 2-story building, you must be even higher in the quality of the design. So
God,
I wouldn't describe it as a reward. I would call it as if you really, really, really wanted to do a 2-story building, we'll let you, but your design's going to have to be higher.
okay, I like that.
So
Okay,
finding it that way,
that
not
makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
Michael?
Yeah, are we also considering technical issues like a very tight building envelope so that and renewable energy.
That's all in the energy codes already.
It's, well,
I mean, that's required by all buildings. It
Mm.
is required, you know.
what about the insulation level, the tightness of the envelope?
That's a building, that's a statewide building.
And
energy
how do we
code.
know that we're complying?
Well,
That's part of, we require the
commercial buildings,
stretch.
commercial buildings usually come pretty close to meeting it just because they do get reviewed at the state level.
Hmm.
The residential build and a multifamily residential building is considered a commercial building. So
yeah.
it's, you know, the energy code does tend to, and also it requires architects and engineers to be involved in the projects, you know, so there's a lot more certification.
So
It
is
doesn't
there-
mean they're all making it, but there's a lot better.
So the
chance
question
of
is, if
getting-
somebody does more than what's required by the energy code, is that something we would give them points for?
I don't think you want to get involved in that.
Not me.
It's really
I don't want to get involved.
complicated. We already don't get involved in it, in the energy code. I mean, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but you know, you get all kind of pushback of saying, we don't know how to review this. So I'm not saying that's a good thing. It would be nice if we had some kind of level of government which could handle that, but we don't. So I'd keep the energy side of things out of that and focus on the physical side of things and the architectural detail.
Yeah, and I'm not looking for reasons why we can't do it. I'm looking for something. There's got to be a way to do something, not say it's impossible. You know, look at the way that, look for the reasons why it can be done.
Were you back on the previous item where we were giving points for the form? Is that what you're talking about?
Because you could do it. You could.
Are you
say it's
talking
a
about here
standard,
with the
but not-
heights?
No.
I'm just curious, cause I guess I'm wondering, like, if I'm thinking about the form. Like, I think back to like Paul's point, we really want the building to like feel right when someone's walking in and out and observing it. So like substituting in something that's not really the form
Well,
feels separate. If we want to address that, it feels like it wouldn't be like instead of windows, it'd be like separate from that point system, maybe.
You know, for example, roof design to get maximum solar gain. Design and orientation.
Mhm.
For example.
Paul Ingles and then Donna.
Just would like to say that I am very much in favor of 14-story buildings. I think it's really important for us to build up. I've thought that for a long time. And I also think we probably, in response to what Donna and Michael were talking about, I think we're long overdue to have building inspectors, although I do understand that applies only to residential, because we do essentially have building inspectors for commercial properties, right? Yeah.
We have building inspectors for the code side of things, not energy code, but life safety codes for anything other than owner occupied single family homes. That's everything else is considered a public building under the state rules. So that's what we do cover today.
So I'd like to see proposals for the 14-story buildings. Yeah, I know, but I mean, some actual, you know, what this would look like in city center would be very interesting to see that.
Yeah.
So we'll do Donna and then Colin, if that's okay.
Yeah, I definitely put some notes down about the 14-story buildings too, because I think, sure, I mean, we could do it, but there's a whole bunch of issues, other issues you're gonna get involved in. And that's gonna be like massing for an area. One is solar access. You start getting into tall buildings, they actually work really well when you're next to a park or something where, you know, the sun shadow is not gonna completely block the sunlight from buildings that are adjacent, because that's a real problem. I mean, it's, and, but on that said, you know, on the north side of Williston Road, that would be fabulous to have some taller buildings. Probably not right on. I mean, there's definitely going to be some setbacks. And so I think the setback issue has to be raised. The other piece is that, you know, we seem to not have any sloped roofs because we've had such large buildings. They tends to be difficult to get sloped roofs on, but architecturally, I mean, it can make it for a very attractive environment. You can tell I've just been in Europe recently, you know, where virtually every building in Amsterdam, in the old section of Amsterdam has a sloped roof. They all have sloped roofs.
But
And
they're only 3 stories, right?
no,
Two,
there's
some-
6.
6 stories?
5 and
Okay.
6 stories, almost all of them are. And they somehow managed to cram elevators into those old buildings. I don't know how they do it. But, you know, actually a lot of the buildings behind the facades have been rebuilt too. That's one.
Donna, to that point specifically, a couple of things in the last section where we talked about that Greg had recommended were that one, architectural features that are above the top habitable story, don't have a
A height
height
limit.
limitation.
Right.
And 2, there was one of the areas of points was specifically to have a varied roof type from a flat roof.
Right.
That does push against other requirements that exist in the energy code and in our own regulations that talk about solar ready roofs and then installing solar on solar ready roofs. And so another energy option might have to be taken if there's going to be no solar panels. Not to say flat roofs are the easiest way to do solar panels. It's not that they can't be done in others, but the efficiency of placement starts to go down, I guess.
Right. Right. But,
So
but I think in terms of city center, the existing city center, I mean, I'd be hard pressed to say what spot a 14-story building might work in, because, you know, because everything's pretty uniformly 4 and 5 stories.
Yeah,
four
so-
stories. And so all of a sudden you get a 14-story building.
So
there's
using
a-
it
there's a
as a couple
feel
of
problem.
examples, you know, the U-Mall is 55 acres in size and is ripe for
That could take,
intense investment.
that could handle a tall building.
The north side of Lewiston Road, as you mentioned, several spots.
Well, Shelburne Road could handle 14 stories.
So that's
Wouldn't
that's not T4 though, right?
No.
It's not in the
Where-
form-based codes.
I mean,
But
I'd agree
like-
that might be a separate question, I guess, maybe.
But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
right near the lake.
Like once we do it here.
Right near the lake, right near the lake, it would be a perfect place to have a 14-story building, but
And-
I think Colin wanted to say some things. Were you
Okay.
ready? Okay.
So I also, I guess second on Paul, I think 14 seems like a pretty solid number. I guess that goes on. So I guess have some concerns about how exactly it's going to be built. One of my personal chief concerns is I'd want to make sure that you don't have situations. I'd be concerned in situations where you get a massive moat of parking and the parking space just gets way out of whack with the, like, I don't want the whole you sometimes see in like places. I think Toronto has a lot where these huge skyscrapers just surrounded by these huge boats of parking, which is, I'm not sure. I just worry about the kind of walkability implications. Like, I guess I'd be probably informed. I grew up in a town, about 20,000 people, about half hour north of Portland. So if anything, more rural feeling than South Burlington. And it has a 16-floor tallage dorm in there. And it honestly blends in really well. Like, it's got like it's well set back from major roads. There's a lot of trees, it's not too obvious. However, because it's a college dorm, there's no parking lot near it. And I think that honestly really helps how it feels. So I guess I'm so more saying, yeah, I like 14 stories. I just would want to see that we understand the implications of a building that size and how we kind of can mitigate some potential adverse things, of which the one that immediately comes to my mind is just where do these cars go? Because, yeah.
That's a big one.
Very happy to hear you say that, actually, because that is one of the things that we initially thought of and were concerned about too. Important to note that none of these changes affect the requirement to build out building frontage to the degree that it would be required to. So a building that, you know, so you couldn't be essentially be able to substitute height for frontage. So that is to say, there still would be street activation along, you know, along two sides of the lot as well, and just the way architecture works, a large amount of that lot then filled in by a particularly tall building.
Mhm.
So we are requiring essentially a certain amount of the lot be devoted to just building by retaining that part of the current LDRs, the frontage requirement. There might be other ways to control the proliferation of parking on a given lot, but you know, we haven't really talked about those yet.
No, I think I agree. That's good. I just want to, you know, I mean, I guess if we're thinking, oh, it's in the U Mall, it's kind of already that, so it's not any worse. But I guess it's just if we're doing this and it's like, I don't know, it's, you know, for like as an example, yeah, City Place, it's in actually have a four-story parking garage. Is there an incentive? I don't know, but like it's this sort of. I want to sort of think like we have the front to one side, but then if there's like six parking behind the building, that may be okay in certain locations, but like I don't want them to be like, I don't know, hypothetically say if there is, you know, a 14-story building in the massive U-Mall lot kind of near-ish with good frontage activation on Dorset Street, but they still have this huge moat separating it from the back of the lot or something. I'm just worried about walkability, that's all. But I'm not saying it's not solvable. I just want to make us, I think it's a problem that isn't really as necessarily as present in these kind of 4-story buildings. I'm a little worried as stuff starts to scale. That's really all I'm kind of trying to say. But
That's fair.
overall, it's important. I just want to make sure that we have some guardrails.
Yeah, that's fair, and that's really good feedback. Thank you. Yeah.
Heard from Duncan yet, and then Paul?
Yeah, actually, when I first read this, I thought it was a misprint. I wasn't sure.
Well, we just thought 140 seemed too tall.
Yeah, I had to do a double take and read it again. But in thinking about it, Colin, you have a good point with parking, because I guarantee you that not all the folks living in a 14-story building are riding a bike. They need a place to park. But I think I'm not disagreeing. I think 14 stories, if we could make it work, would be great. The question is, where would it work? I think that's a real critical question. Excuse me. And you know, it would be interesting to see if we took the current form-based code and, you know, sort of slotted where we thought a building of that size would work. Obviously, the U-Mall being one. Donnie, you got a great point about the north side of Wilson Road. That's kind of a dead zone. So yeah, it would be very interesting. I mean, that's intriguing, but I'm positive that, you know, members of the public reading that would have a similar reaction to go, what?
Right.
So, you know, I think that it would behoove us to really thoroughly think through where and how that would work. And all the things that come with a building of that size. I'm not disagreeing with, I'd love to see it work. But there's a lot of entrails with something of that size. And I think that, again, I think that's such a big departure from what we have, that it's, for a lot of people, it might be really tough to swallow and go, wow, that can't work. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, that's
So-
good guidance. Thank you. Sorry.
Paul was gonna go.
It seems that they've solved the water problem out here in terms of going down, right, for underground parking. For the most part,
Yes,
expensive though.
expensive but solved. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would assume that a 14-story building, it's not something I know much about, but there must be bedrock somewhere that this would have to be built at, right?
Right.
You know,
It's not always the case in the Champlain Valley.
I know some crazy solutions I've seen for very large ones is the whole Cambrian Rise one that's going up in the new North End. They've got like, I think it's like a 2 or 3-story kind of huge parking structure that's like has a kind of park on top of it, essentially like the patio. It's kind of on a good slope there. So they actually didn't have to dig down that far, but they kind of raised the ground up and sort of turned into like a patio area. Like there are definitely creative solutions to not having a huge honking ugly parking structure.
what's the U-Mall, the water situation, or,
You mean in
Water
terms of
table?
groundwater?
yeah,
I'm not sure. You know, an interesting, you know, speaking of that specific property, they've got an interesting asset / liability, which is that they've got 1,000-car parking garage that's sitting there and it's
Yeah.
almost never used. So,
It's already there.
imagine if that could be used.
Do
Yeah,
we know, is there a reason? It's usually gated. You can't even get in there. Do you know why that is?
Because there are 2,000 other parking spaces at the U Mall.
Oh, so it's not like it's deficient. It's not deteriorating. They just don't want to deal with people in there.
Right.
No,
So they do open it up at certain holiday seasons, but it's really just because there is not the demand to use it. And so
Oh,
it's,
ground floor, you can't go in?
I think you can use the ground floor, but not the upper 3
But not
stories
the
of it.
upper,
And that's
yeah.
really just about,
Yeah, who
managing,
needs to go up, yeah.
right? Because then you have to manage, people being up there. So
Yeah.
they just close
You
it
have to
off.
plow
But
it.
but it's not a safety issue that I'm aware of.
interesting.
Yeah.
is this kind of thinking going on at U-Mall now?
Pardon me?
Is this kind of thinking about 14-story buildings going on at U-Mall, do you think?
I don't know about specifically 14 stories. I would say broadly speaking, as they are thinking about their work, they are thinking about
Going up,
substantial,
yeah,
being up, being compact, being urban, when they do it. So,
that's great.
I haven't had a conversation about the exact number of stories, but I think that they're not in any way, worried about height.
Yeah.
And I think that they are thinking sort of methodically about how to do it so that it's, that they're looking at the long view of it too.
So they are thinking about something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nothing
Nothing concrete?
nothing active, nothing imminent, but they are actively, interested in the property.
And they don't have to look like the 19th century because they've already been a mall, right?
And they're right on that new bike bridge we're building. So that's nice.
So I guess I need to be convinced, and I think the public does too. So I think this is something that we're gonna have to have some examples. I mean,
3D modeling.
the
Right. you
the
get-
Decker Towers is not something to emulate necessarily. I don't think people like go by there and are like, oh, we love this one tall building we have in Vermont. And then the whole downtown pointing that and being like, oh, it'll eventually be 12 stories is also like, I mean, it's kind of hard here in Vermont to picture what this might look like or
Not
feel.
so much a hole there now, though.
I know it's not a hole. I know it's not a hole, but
It's tall.
but
It's
so
tall.
many people already think of that as kind of like a depressed place. They've seen a hole for a long time. So saying, oh, there's a 12-story building. We haven't experienced.
That's all
that.
very fair. At the same time, I know around the corner from where that mall spot was, there was an infill building that's gone in next to what was the People's Bank, and it's 9 at least, maybe 10.
Yeah.
And that's a completely, it didn't have a big hole associated with it. There's no big dramatic story. They just did it. And so I'm not sure that we would likely see a 14 right off the bat here, but the economics are shifting in Vermont to where that's more has the possibility, and I that's really valuable feedback.
Well,
about it.
maybe
And I
we'll
think,
start with 10.
also just, and I'm not saying we have to just go to 7 and then eventually after we get a 7, we can go to, I'm not saying that, but I think just thinking through like, I mean, we've heard that next door, there aren't enough outdoor amenities and then people don't have a place to be. So like thinking through, like if we're gonna have 14 stories, what does that mean for amenities we need and parking we need? And is it just too much? Do we not have that infrastructure here? And then also, is there a difference between T5 and T4? Because right now, this doesn't talk about, I mean, it says maybe there's a transition zone, but I think that's something that we'll need to think through, the way.
The T5 is currently just Market Street from Garden Street to Dorset Street.
It's pretty small.
It's pretty.
This
small.
is all your own regulations. You can
Planning
change it wherever
commission.
you want. So you could say, for example, you could
lots.
say the frontage of the U-Mall property or the north end of the U-Mall property is T5. The primary distinctions between the T5 and T4 today, which is not written in stone, are that the T5 requires a commercial ground floor and the doorway spacing is a little different and there's a little more height. But all of these things are up for amendment. You could say, Paul spoke earlier about, the relationship to streets. You could say that T5 on Market Street must be commercial ground floor, and T5 on Williston Road, or pick some other street, is given all the other things, but it doesn't have to be commercial on the first floor. There's no rule that tells the form-based code is the community's creation. So it's it's what you want to achieve.
I've always
Well,
thought this
right.
area of downtown eventually would be Dorset and Market, the corner, the big corner out here.
Maybe that's a place to start with that height.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Seems like the natural center to me,
Though making that intersection more pedestrian scale may be a interesting challenge, but nothing can be done. I'm just trying to think like how do you make this a human scale place, and
We thought of a million ways to have pedestrian friendly, I mean, at one point we wanted to have the entire street be brick with no differentiation between bike, pedestrian and auto. That would slow the autos down quite a bit.
Or kill a few people. Yeah.
oh,
Well, I think, I think the end of the memo here kind of questions what kind of information or analysis would be helpful for us when thinking through this. I don't know if anyone else, hey, Michael. So if we need any more analysis to be able to figure this out, I think we should try to give some direction on that. I mean, we named a few things like parking, open space, amenities. How would that change with such a bigger building? Talked about some solar.
Incentive, I
Training.
think we need some more.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if there's anything else. Maybe we did hear one example of a spot we could go by. And we can also open up to the audience as well before we end up. So maybe you can think about other information you need from staff. We can see if, does anyone in the room have anything for us? Okay, one.
Just real quick, Tim Barrett, resident. Ladder trucks can only go to 6 or 7 stories, just for fire department, just for your edification if you didn't know. But standpipes help fight fires in buildings that are over that number of stories. But just so you know, the ladder truck can't go over 6 or 7 stories.
Yeah, which we have a great point, Tim. We talked about that before, and that's I think why we settled at 6 stories in the current draft. So we'd need feedback on the.
That's an achievable thing. We'll get
Okay,
the feedback.
we'll get the feedback.
I guess I'd be curious how Burlington solves that issue.
Yeah,
We have a taller ladder.
they
They do, they have different.
do. have
Fire
different
trucks.
equipment.
Yeah.
They also have inside suppression
Okay.
systems.
Well, we'll get that
Yeah.
from the fire
Yeah,
department.
Yeah,
And then anyone online have anything,
Looks like, right?
Brian?
Yeah, I'll send you guys a follow-up email because, well, I have a lot of notes. But I think the height thing is great. There's obviously a lot of places in the city where it could go and not be creating very large shadows. Not that shadows are the end of the world. In terms of public space and outdoor space, when you have more people around a park gets used more. It's more eyes out there. It ends up being safer. And so it just means that you have more money to actually invest into the public space and keep it maintained better and nurture it. So I think that's all good stuff for particularly a downtown area. There's a part of the city zone just to the northwest of the form-based code that would then have a lower height limit than the form-based code. And this is the area right between the DoubleTree and UVM. And I think that's maybe the area most appropriate to have the highest buildings in the city. So I'd want to look at that. I'd ask you guys to look at that area and consider how those heights can be changed or affected by this. With fenestration and the issue with glazing and the energy code, you'll notice that with a lot of buildings that go in that look ugly, like on Market Street, that there isn't much framing around the windows. There's a little bit more on the building on Garden Street, closer to Trader Joe's. But if you have windows that are framed decoratively, it gives the impression of window space, even if there isn't as much actual transparency. So you could set a minimum amount of of actual transparency or glazing of 25%, but still have the window accoutrement help add up to a 30% to give that sort of appearance. There's even buildings that you can see that they have a bricked, they might have a window shape, but it's just still brick in there with a different pattern. Because either there's actually a staircase behind there, or that's where actually bathrooms end up. In St. Albans, there's a nice port window, but it's not a window, it's just a giant brick, and it looks like a bulldog coming out of the window. That decorates a building. It gives the same impression of fenestration that you need somewhat of to be seeable space, without actually reducing, like the R value, the same way a window would. In terms of what Colin brought up about the staircase issue, I have a great video I'll send you guys about that. Seattle did away with requiring 2 staircases until the building is over 6 stories. And Europe is like this as well. It's really just the US and Canada that aren't, despite not actually having better fire safety outcomes, and newer buildings, ironically. So I'll write up some summary stuff and get some media resources and send them out to you guys soon. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
You've got some great just scripture words in there, the accoutrement and the fenestration. I'm gonna try to
Oh my
bump up
gosh.
my vocabulary here.
The last thing was actually from staff. What was the word you guys used for the basements?
Oh, the rusticated basements?
Yeah, I
Rusticated
had to look that
basements.
up.
What kind of
You
basement?
guys, this is such a pet
Rusticated.
peeve of mine. If you look
Oh.
at any building in city center, you can
What
see
was
the
the
form
spelling?
marks on the foundations before they go into the ground. And the lack of having designed space there, I think makes things look really extra cheap. If you look at any place that's historic, you have these rusticated basement foundation stones that are thick masonry. They hold up the building. St. Albans, I was just looking around there because they're the Shazy Reef limestone. So there's fossils all over those stones. And they look really great, supporting those buildings. But if you look at our buildings, we just don't have designed space between where the facade stops and the ground starts. And I wouldn't put that in the discretionary. I would make that a requirement. And everything else I'll email to you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so hopefully that gave everyone some moments to think if there's anything that staff could help us with to really visualize or start to think about 14 stories or a different height or.
Well, could they identify some potential areas maybe that are not form-based code now, but we can always change that, yes? Or where you might put a 14-story or a 10-story building in South Burlington?
Sure, I think the focus of this project is on the city center form-based code, knowing that you just changed the heights in other parts of the city, so let that play out a little bit. And B, I think, the city plan and a lot of the good discussion has been for years of let's make sure that the core of South Burlington is our most urban place. So before we sort of launch the tall story outside of city center, right now we're inverted where we say taller buildings are allowed outside of city center than in city center. So, but we can take a look at it. I think, we took initially the approach for the purpose of this conversation of saying the form-based code T4 and T5 with some exceptions of transition areas like, adjacent neighborhoods. If you'd like us to refine that a little bit, we certainly can. We didn't want to self-limit before you had the chance to have a conversation.
Well, I personally have I totally agree with going up. I'm not sure as I visualize city center, with the exception of the mall, 14 stories.
Yeah,
I don't know.
well, that was the
which
point I
little-
was gonna
little
make.
Thought it would do, but I could envision it in the mall area, but not on Market Street. I think people would be beside themselves and they wouldn't get it. So I think we have to be very,
Right.
as Jessica suggested, we need to really be careful about how we share that with the public and identify where are some reasonable places.
It would have to be in an
I
area.
don't think Market Street is one of them.
No, it's-
Guardian Street.
But maybe we'll be convinced, you know, there could be
But-
with appropriate information and visualizing
Mhm.
and examples, maybe. I guess that's what I meant, like, I'm not
Yeah.
ready to say yes, but I'm not against the idea,
Right.
and I
Well,
feel
we
like
need
the
similar
public's gonna have
analogies.
similar questions,
Four
so.
stories, 5 stories.
I was just wondering, is there, I mean, it would be nice to have a 3D model that kind of allows you to visualize, you know,
Mhm.
different building heights, different building shapes and things. And I don't know if maybe the city can keep such a model so that when you get proposals, and you can see what it looks like in terms of massing.
Lego building.
No,
Oh, yeah.
digital
Or
model,
digital.
digital model.
One of them.
Yeah,
before.
We did in the
Could
very
get it tuned
beginning.
up.
it wouldn't be good to mix a 14-story building with what are 4 or 5s here. But if you are in an area where you're gonna allow such high buildings, you would also allow other taller buildings, not mix them together. Maybe 10 stories and 14 stories and 12, that's okay. But-
7 even. I mean,
Yeah. But putting them with, mixed up with this kind of setup here, which is 4 or 5.
But that's what we
Should do the design. Doesn't-
There's no space.
Yeah.
Check this out.
um,
I'm not sure I want
Were
the,
they on stilts?
it looks like there's really
No.
scary things from
It was a
Star
very
Wars.
interesting.
Oh, Connor,
Oh, right.
apart from Allard Square and I think this building next door, are there any other buildings with underground parking? Amongst the new lot?
So
That-
the four buildings facing onto Market Street right here all have four are being built with underground parking.
Ah.
The two that are at the corner of Market Street and Garden Street that have been occupied are both have underground parking. The large building behind Healthy Living has underground parking. Most of them in fact do.
Okay.
One level of underground parking.
Okay, are we
Yeah.
ready to do minutes?
Yep.
Okay, we have October 22nd.
I'll move them as presented.
Looks like a great meeting. Any edits?
Yeah, one edit. Page 3. First line. Third paragraph down, first line.
Just so Sue can get the minutes, can you turn on your
Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, it was the page 3, third paragraph, first line, where it says, Ms. Laban said it is hard to solicit feedback without real life examples, not exemptions.
Okay,
That was what I said.
okay, anything else? Okay, all in favor of approval with the one edit?
Aye.
That was unanimous, very exciting. We have other business, it's just the Winooski's item. I don't know if anyone has any comments on that at all. It's mainly in there
What
for our
is this?
information. We already covered our schedule. Does anyone else have any other business?
No.
Okay, then we are adjourned.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Very good.
you.
It's very
Thank you
interesting.
all.
Good meeting. These
was
buildings
interesting.
are somewhere around 14 stories.
It's a crazy canyon. So I guess they have that one beam.
It's actually not,
Did you-
yeah, it's not
Did
totally.
you
cantilever.
follow
There's
the,
some there, right there too.
Yeah.
But
height,
yeah, they were designed to look like.
height
cranes,
battles over
You know,
Yes,
the
which,
cranes next to
yes,
the river.
in.
which definitely
here.
like
Right.
models that like old shipyard
Yeah.
crane
Oh, sorry.
And it was a
feeling.
woman architect.